Oisai, we are holding the 17th parak of Yerushalmi Shabbos. We are Kuf Aleph on the base towards the bottom. Halacha Hey. Kala Kelim Nitalim b'Shabbos. So the vessels that you can use on Shabbos, if they break, Shivrei and Nitalim, the broken pieces can still be moved and they're no muksa, providing providing they can do a job. It might be a different job, but as long as they can still be used for something. For example, Shivrei Areva, you have a big bowl, which you might use for kneading, and the broken pieces, can use it as a lid. A glass vessel with broken pieces now is usually used for drinking, and now the broken piece can be used again for a stopper of some kind, a lid of some kind. Rabbi Yehuda requires the broken pieces to do a similar job to what they used to be used for. So Shivrei Areva, put a stew in these broken pieces. Or, is the glass one, to put oil in it. So you've got to use it for liquids with these broken pieces like you used to be able to use them. Right? Whereas if they're not fitting for the same malacha, then Rabbi Yehuda, however, then says that they are muksa. Right? Although, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not enough to allow them for tilted if they break on Shabbos itself. They've got to be for the malacha similar to what they used to be used for. That's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. Whereas the Tanakama say no. Even if it broke on Shabbos, as long as it's fit for a job, that's good enough. Okay. Taman Tanina. We've learned elsewhere on Daf Ches. Hamoitzi. Well, actually, it's a Sabbath test. One who takes zechuchis, one carries glass, the chiyuv to be chayav for carrying, ligroid bar rosh hakarkad. This is like a weaver's stick. To use it, even a small piece of glass, which is you can like move a stick or something, or to wind it into it somehow, it's considered fit for use. Here we're saying it's not a keli unless it's fitting to be a stopper, which is a bit bigger. Here we're talking about ba'ava with thick glass, which is sort of opaque, and you can't sharpen these sticks of the weavers. So it's not a keli unless it was big enough to be a stopper. Whereas Khan, earlier on in the 8th parak, is Bechada, it's like a much sharper piece, which is fitted for sharpening this, his tool, and therefore it's considered something fit for using like that shit. But here's the way someone has said, we're talking about the heter of moving things, so it's got to be fit to be some sort of lid, otherwise it's not a keli. Whereas Khan, in the 8th parak, we're talking about motzi, we're talking about carrying. And for that, as it's fit for use, that's enough to be chayav chatas, even if it hasn't got a din of keli. Right? Since people put it aside to use it, it's got importance as far as the malacha votes are. Halacha vav. Now, stones, branches, muksa. Now, what about if you prepare them for use from a Friday? So, Evan Shabakiruya. So this is a pumpkin, you've dried out a pumpkin, you've made a hole in it, and you can pour water with it from the well. You're going to pick water from the well with this pumpkin or whatever it is. Now, it floats on the water, so what do? You put a stone inside to weigh it down. So, if when you fill up the water, the stone doesn't fall when you pick up the water, you've tightened it quite securely, but you're allowed to pour this water on Shabbos, and pick up the water with it, and it's not considered a bosses with the stone. But if you don't tighten the stone, then you're not allowed to get the water out on Shabbos because it's a bosses for the stone. You have a branch, a long branch, which you tie to a small jug to sort of lower it into a well and to get water. Malin Baba Shabbos, you're allowed to use that on Shabbos by using it, tying it to this branch. The branch is the keli to use as a rope for you drawing this water. It's not a bosses.
Did you say it's muksa?
We're saying it's not. You've prepared it. You've tied it. You've tied it to the jug. So you've tied it. You've done an action before Shabbos to designate it as a keli of some kind. Yeah.
It's not a nice little money.
It becomes a keli. Well, you've tied it. You've done a secure knot to it. So you've connected it. Now, we're going to bring, you're allowed to take a basket which has got a stone. Okay, we're going to bring a Gemara with a slightly different version of the Girsa. And Antonina, in our wording, it says you can take the basket and the stone is inside. Whereas, Tanit Ve Rebbe, the base mention of Rebbe they learned, you can take a basket, there's food and a stone inside. So we don't allow it just with a stone. There's going to be also some food in there. So it's a basis for the food, which is more expensive than the stone. That's why you can move it. Whereas if it's just a stone, it'll be forbidden. Rav Yaakov Azapti, B'Shem Rabavo, is Palgan, Rav Chia Bar Yosef, Rav Yochanan. Rav Chia Bar Yosef held Kemas Nisa, like the gifts of our Mishnah, and Rav Yochanan Kadol Zahari Be Rebbe, like the gifts of the basement of Rebbe. Mas Nisa Pliga Rav Yochanan. Now, our Mishnah goes against the words of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan's version, he followed the basic medrash of Rebbe, that there's food inside as well. So why? So you got this pumpkin, and you got the stone. If the stone doesn't fall, when you fill up the water, you've secured it, you're allowed to use it. And it's not a basis. The reason is, the stone's got no importance. It cannot take away the importance of the container that you're using. So it's not a basis. So even with a stone, it's not a basis if there's just a stone in there. Now, why the stone has to be secure is not a basis. But Kimashi is pushed into it tightly. Kagufa here becomes like part of the pumpkin, right? It's like a wall of the pumpkin, so it's not muksa. The sefer, right? Whereas if it didn't muksa, it would change the whole thing to a basis. Now, the sefer please got Rav Chia Bar Yosef. Now, the part in that Mishnah goes against the Gibbs Rav Chia Bar Yosef's version. Let's see. We've learned in our Mishnah, Vimlav, if you don't tighten it well, and it just falls when you start drawing the water out, then you cannot fill the thing with water, because it's a basis to the stone. So you see from here, the basket with a stone is a basis. So the Gemara explains, Rav Yudan with his bill, let's see, Rav Yudan, he says, you know why you can't carry the pumpkin with the stone when it's not secure? The kibbutz is made to make the thing weighty, right? So you can get the water out. So that gives it importance. When it's like the pumpkin is coming because of the stone. The pumpkin is a basis to the stone. And therefore you're moving it for the sake of the stone. So with a stone in the basket, in the pumpkin, the Mishnah says it changes the basis to be muksa because it's got a special chashivas of its own importance. A usual stone wouldn't have that importance. And that wouldn't make it into a basis or a muksa. What does Rabbi Yochanan do with the raya from Rabbi Yudan? Surely you see that a normal stone has got no importance, doesn't make a basis. So why are you allowed to move the basket with a stone? So therefore it seems you're allowed to do it. That's not like Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara answers, he holds Rabbi Yochanan wasn't explaining the issur of using the thing when the stone is not secure. No, he's coming to say why you're allowed to use the pumpkin when the stone is secure. And Rabbi Yochanan changed the wording. He says like this, when it's secure, it's like you're just carrying the pumpkin itself. You know why I can use it when the stone is secure? Because then the stone is part of the pumpkin. And it's considered just moving the pumpkin. Right? So had the stone not have been part of the pumpkin, then it would have changed the pumpkin to a basis. And that's like Rabbi Yochanan. But this appliga Rabbi Yochanan. At the beginning of our Mishnah, where part of it is brought, is there's a din which goes against Rabbi Yochanan, because we've learned, Noitel Adam, this is a person can take Benai, his son, but Evan B'yodeh, the son is holding a stone. You carry a son, the son is holding a stone. And Noitel Kalav, Evan B'toicha, a basket and the stone inside. V'tolit V'Rebbe, and based on Rebbe, the gift is like this, Ha'evan V'Eichle B'toicha, the stone and the food is inside. You can't carry it otherwise. Now, it says you can take a child with the stone. And why isn't carrying the child considered carrying the stone? I mean, surely the derech to take a child holding something is as if you're holding it. It's not tiltum el atzad. So the answer is the stone has no importance, right? So moving the child is not secondary to the stone, right? Most children aren't secondary to the stone. So it's not considered moving the stone. And so for that same reason, we should allow you to move a basket with a stone inside, because since you don't have, the stone's got no importance, the basket is not a basis, and moving the basket is not going after the stone, it's not a proper tilting of the stone, it's moving it from the side. Now, this is a question against the gifts of Rabbi Yochanan, and Tanit Ve Rebbe, they forbade you to move a basket with a stone. So Rav Cohen, I love that name, Rabbi Cohen, B'Shem, let's say it again, Rabbi Cohen, B'Shem Rabbanan B'Tamam, in the name of the Chachamim in Babel, Tinag also Isaac Eichlin, a child, we treat him as a as food, right? The reason why we allow the child holding the stone, because it's like moving a basket with food apart from the stone. The basket's got a stone and the food, everyone agrees you can move it. So as well, food, everyone agrees the stone is nothing compared to the food. Therefore, moving the basket is like food and not stone. The same thing here is the stone has got no importance, and moving it is the main thing is you're moving the child. Tamana, another answer he said in Baba. Also, we treat the stone in the child's hand like an amulet which has been tested. Biyad tinok, in the hands of the child. Right? We're talking about a case where the stone calms the child down and prevents illness. And there was like a segula of some kind to prevent illness. Halacha Zayin with me, yeah. Rabbi Lezer Pekat Kachaloin. It's a sort of shutter. What do they call it there? A shutter of some kind? A shutter, which is made to close a window for a period of time, like a board or curtain or something. When it's tied to the building with a rope, the tolo may be hanging in the air. So even if it's not standing in the window, it's still hanging, it's not dragging on the ground. But you're allowed to close that shutter on Shabbos. You're not adding a new building onto the binyan. Right? It's already been set up, it's part of the building. V'im lav, but if it's not tied and hanging, right? It's like dragging on the ground. You cannot use it on Shabbos. You can't close that window on Shabbos. But Chacham, they said, whatever happens, you can. Any lid which has like a handle, the Shabbos can be moved on Shabbos. But if it doesn't have a handle, it's muksa and it cannot be moved on Shabbos. Now here, now in Bavli, this is brought only for lids on kalim which are stuck to the ground, like pits in the ground and have a manhole cover or something like that. Whereas Yerushalmi, so far we have not said. We said all lids. If they have a handle, it's fine. When do we say they can't be moved on Shabbos unless they have a handle? Because now coverings on land, like the pit in the ground, which has got a handle, looks like it's building. When it comes to vessels, they can't be moved on Shabbos. So now, although in Bavli, Kisa Kalim without a handle was only 7 things connected to the ground. And now, but that's really what we're saying here, isn't it? It's Kisik Kakois. The wording is slightly different. We're allowing, when is there a problem? A lid on the ground. Whether that's a keli or not, something on the ground. We don't mention kalim in the ground. Alright. The Mishnah in Erevin, closing a door with a bolt. Right, it's got some sort of peg inside and a bolt to lock the door. And if this bolt is nigra, if it's dragging on the ground, Ezo nega nigrar. So it's Machlokes written in the Chachamim about this bolt, which is again dragging. Rav Yechon Kosher is tied to the door, even though it's not hanging above the ground, it's all resting on the ground. Rav Yechon, he said, Mashchani Chilfai took me, any nega shishel Beis Rebbe. He showed me the one at Beis Rebbe, which was kosher, which was tied to the door with a rope. They used it even though it was not hanging in the air. Rav Yechon said, so the only individual Tana in our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Lezer, who doesn't allow it unless it's like tied and hanging in the air, fits in with the Tana over there in Erevin, which is the Tana Kaba, that they don't allow the door to the bolt unless it's tied and hanging. So our Rabbi Lezer is like the Tana Kaba over there. V'chidada Taman, the individual over there, which is Rabbi Yehuda, who allows it with its tied even not hanging. This Stamadacha is like the Stam Tana over here, the first Chachamim here, who allow you to use it with its tied even if it's not hanging. Rabbi Yosef, he said, what do we do? He said, he took me, and he showed me the bolt in Rebbe's house, which was kosher, it was tied. Even though it was not dragging on the ground, right? It wasn't dragging. This tells me, like the view of Rabbi Yehuda, which is Rabbi Yehuda, who's lenient, he allows you to use it if it's tied and not hanging. That's how we paskin. Asa Rav Huda came on Shebishma, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. As long as it's tied, even though it's not hanging. Adri kosher badeles. providing it's going to be tied to the door. So it's noticeable it's made for opening and closing the door. Rabbi Yanai, Chamoid Rav Ami, he said, it's got to be tied to the door with something strong that it can hold this lock thing if it was hanging in the air. But if it was tied in a way where it couldn't hold its weight, like a very weak ribbon or something, we couldn't hold its weight, you can't use that. It's got to be a tight thing that could hold it. The bolt of Reb Elazar was tied begemi with some sort of thin strap of some kind, even a weak one, a reed or something, whatever it is, rubber, reed, and but not everyone held to that. But there we are. Nishmat also, if the rope and the bolt comes to the ground, it falls to the ground, also it is forbidden. Nikmaz, if when you put it in the hole, it goes all the way through, and it's like it gets stuck in the ground. Maybe the hole's towards the bottom, so it gets stuck in the ground, and it's like more like boiner because it's sticking in the ground. Rabbi Yaakov Barach Hashem Rabbanon, as they said, Medadeu, you can sort of move it into the hole, brush it with the tops of your fingers. Don't put it normally into the ground to make a hecker that it should look like boiner. Yeah.
So what would you say about like a peg? It's in a gate.
Yeah.
It's got a peg that goes into the ground.
Into the ground.
It's attached to the wall, but the peg goes into the ground.
It's a problem if it goes in the ground. Well, the door's made to open and close. Well, each time it's like making another hole.
Like a gate to a driveway.
The door doesn't go in the ground.
No, the gate to the driveway has a peg.
The gate is attached to a peg that stays in the ground.
No, you pick up the peg in order to free the gate. The peg goes in, so the gate's...
Oh, so that peg is actually stuck in the ground. I've not seen it. I've not seen like that.
No, we don't do like that.
We don't do like that now. No. But you're right, it'll be the same problem. Unless the peg is tied and hanging to the door or something, then you say it's part of the door. But if it's going in and out of the ground, and each time you're making a hole in the ground, that's a problem. Any lids of kalim which have got a handle can be moved on Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef said, when is that? But it's going to be to allow the moving with like land things, like a kisser of a pit in the well in the ground. Whereas kalim, if they have a handle or not, you can move them on Shabbos. He said the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, Perek 18. Right? Shmona Asrei. Okay, halacha aleph. Mefanin. Now, one is allowed. There are things you shouldn't do because there's a lot of bother. It looks like a daytime, a weekday thing. But they allow you to do various things for the sake of mitzvah, for the sake of animals. Mefanin avir abba v'chamesh kupos. You're allowed to take out the storehouse even 4 or 5 boxes shel tevet of straw, shel tvua of grain, v'nei achin, to prepare room for the meal for the guests, v'nei bittul beis medrash, to prepare place for the talmidim to learn, during the drasha, and to prevent bittul Torah. Even though moving these boxes is bother, but for the sake of these mitzvahs is permitted. But don't just clear away the whole storehouse. But fanin truma tahira, you're allowed to move truma, which is fitting for a Cohen on Shabbos. It's not muksa. Udmai, or grain, tvua, which is taken from Amoritz, where you have to separate maestros midrabanan. Where the trumas masa has been separated, and now it's permitted to be eaten. Sheni which has been redeemed, or hegdash, so now they're chulin. But hatomus, type of pulse, hayom is the dry one. Neishul machal anim, that's food for the poor. Therefore, it's fitting on Shabbos. It's not muksa. Avallah is a tevel. Do not move tevel, which of course no one can eat. Where the truma has not been taken. Where has not been redeemed. Haluf, which is a type of pulse which is not cooked. Chadal, or non-ground up garlic. These things are not fitting. These are muksa. They don't allow you to move muksa for guests. It's food for the ravens. So he holds it's not muksa. Since it's fitting for the ravens, it's considered mucha. Okay. Mefanin, it's 4 or 5 boxes. Yerushalmi. How big is the box? We learn what we don't know from what we do know. Remember in Shkalim, Rabbi Sai, Shkalim is coming up soon. We are holding very near Masechet Shabbos Daf. So this week, Shabbos Shkalim, and here we have it. Shalosh Kupos is a right that when you learn Yerushalmi, you should be a week and a half ahead. Shalosh Kupos, Shalosh Sahim, 3 boxes of 3 sah each. Tomin is Halishka. We take the Machzis HaShekel which is in the Lishka over there, and Trumas HaLishka, and we buy the Kabbonas for the Tzivur. Each one of the boxes was holding 3 sah. That, therefore, is the size of a box. You can move on Shabbos until 3 sah. Taman Taninan, we've learned elsewhere, Hamoitzi Yayin, you carry wine out, raw wine, undiluted wine from one domain to another. The Shit Michayv is the amount that you can dilute it with water to make the right share. What's the size of the cups? It says, I'm foolish. What we don't know, we learn from what we do know. The Pesach, 4 cups of Pesach, which they were sucking to drink the first night, Yeshnan Revis, they have together Revis, Yain Talki, of this Italian wine, undiluted. Each one of the cups is a quarter of a Revis. And you add 3/4 water, and then you have a whole Revis. So Yain is Miziga Sakais, right? Ma'alafana is Mina. What about emptying out boxes from the storehouse which you never used before? Kaseder Hazeh, like we've learned like this, let's say 4 or 5 boxes to prepare a place for the guests. So we say, since you hadn't started doing this before Shabbos, maybe you can't do it. So maybe it's all muksa. Ishmeina Menado, we learn from the following. V'shavin, they agree, that you shouldn't take on Shabbos any grain from the Eitza which you didn't take before Shabbos because it's muksa. You can just make a little path within there to push the grain to one side to the other side when you go past by. And then you go in and come out the Eitza. So from the Brisa we learn, you shouldn't start and use from the grain of the Eitza on Shabbos because of muksa. Now, you can take Truma Tahira on Shabbos, right? That's not muksa. Now, what about a mixture of Truma and Chulin? So let's see, various Tanaim discuss this. Some say Matan is the more. You can move something, a mixture of Chulin with Truma. Some say something you can't. Chulin mixed with Truma Tahira, it's a Cohen can have it, like Truma Tahira. Therefore, it's not muksa. The one said you can't is but Truma Tameh. Truma Tameh, then even a Kohen can't eat it. Now, it could be we're both talking about Truma Tameh, but there's no argument. The question is, the one who says you can move it is where there's enough chulin to nullify the Truma Tameh. Since the Truma is batel, the thing is not muksa. However, the one where you haven't got enough to nullify it, then you can't move it. Who is the Tana who says you can move a mixture where there's chulin if you've got enough to be mevatel the Truma Tameh within there? So you need 100 against Truma, yeah? So maybe, surely, okay, the Truma Tameh is batel and chulin, but maybe you still have to separate the share of Truma that fell in to give it to the Cohen. And that hafrasha, until you do that, is forbidden. You haven't yet taken out a bit to give to the Cohen. So you shouldn't be able to be mafresh to the Cohen from this mixture of Shabbos, this tikkun of the mixture. So the dimur is not really fitting now because you need to take out a bit and give it to the Cohen. So the Tana says, the one who says you can move the mixture of Shabbos is Rebbe Lezer. The Tanina we've learned in Trumas. Now when one sah of Tameh falls into 100 of Chulin Tahir, Rebbe Lezer just pick up one and burn it. Separate one, burn it. Because I say Soshan Afla, the one that fell in, he Soshan Alis is the one that came out. That's how we say it. The one that fell in is the one that came out. It's the idea of Truma Tameh, and it's given to the Kohen, and he benefits. Basically, he has to burn it. He can use it as fuel, right? So the sah that which is there, it's as if it's the one that fell in. So we don't look at the Truma that fell in like a mixture with Chulin. We say no, it's there separate on the side, and separating the sah for the Kohen is not tikkun for the mixture. You're allowed to do it on Shabbos. So Rebbe Lezer is the Tana who said you're allowed to move that mixture which has got Chulin inside to mevatel the Truma that fell in. But since you're allowed on Shabbos to separate from the mixture corresponding to the Truma that fell in and eat the remainder, so this mixture is fitting for eating on Shabbos, it's not muksa, you're allowed to move it. Rabbi Lazar, you know what? You can stand on a Friday and say, Harezu, this portion of the fruit, you're designating Truma before Shabbos, and you're standing there before Shabbos. Harezu Truma lamacha. This should be Truma tomorrow on Shabbos. Even though the Truma is Chal on Shabbos, you're allowed to do it. You designated the Truma before Shabbos. You can't stand on Shabbos and say this should be Truma tomorrow, on the Sunday. Even though Truma is not Chal till after Shabbos, you're not allowed to do that. You can't designate the Truma on Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef Budaimer, he said, you can't say on a Friday, Harezu Truma Lamach, Truma tomorrow. Because the Truma is Chal on Shabbos, you're masaking the fruit on Shabbos. Masnisa, Fliga, the Mishnah Tvul argues on the view of Rabbi Yosef Budaimer. Login, you've got a jug of wood, Tvul which has been removed the Tumah on that day. There's still a bit of Tumah till sunset. I mean, you filled up in this from a barrel of Masechet Tevel, Masechet Rishon, where you hadn't taken Trumas Maseh from it, right? Now, what you want to do is you want to use what's in the jug to be Trumas Maseh on what's remaining in the barrel. So you want your little jug, which is Tul Yom, to be Trumas Maseh for what's in the big barrel. If you say, now this, remember, it's a Tul Yom little jug. It's going to be Tameh for the rest of the day. You are now separating and you want the stuff inside to be Truma, let's say, for what's in the barrel. Now, if you say what's in the jug, Harezu Trumas Maseh, this Trumas Maseh, what's in the barrel, Misha Techshach, it should be Chal later on, after dark, then Harezu Trumas Maseh, it becomes Trumas Maseh and it's tar. However, if it was a Friday, and Amav, he said, Hareza Eruv, this should be, whatever's in the jug should be Eruv Techumin, La Maklum, it doesn't help. Because since the Truma is not Chal till it gets dark, Ben Hashmoshes, there was no Eruv in place, the Ben Eruv has to be valid from Ben Hashmoshes. And it's not fitting at that time, even for a Cohen, you cannot use it for an Eruv, it's going to be something which is fitting to be eaten Ben Hashmoshes. So you see from here, you can designate Trumas Maseh on a Friday, and stipulate that it shouldn't be Chal till the night. And that's not like Rabbi Yossi, who said you can't do it. Pasala, he will explain the Mishnah to Sha'ava, if you did it, if you did it on Friday and you said what was in the jug will be Trumas Maseh on Friday night, your words stand. But ideally you shouldn't say it. But didn't Reb Chia learn a price on this Mishnah about Omer? He said it's Trumas Maseh Mishatech Shah Islach Meimah Sha'ava. You can honestly say Reb Chia is talking about Hafrosha, which was B'di'evet. It sounds like you shouldn't do this. You can do this, no problem. So the Gemara says, he changed his mind from this because of this brisa of Reb Chia, and he paskin, you are allowed to separate the Truma on Erev Shabbos, that it should be Chal on Shabbos. Okay, now we also have a Mishnah in Demai, which goes against the view of Rabbi Yossi. It says someone who's not in his house on a Friday, he's not going to get home in time to take Maasros before Shabbos. On Friday, he can say, whatever he separates tomorrow will be Truma and Maseh. Now it sounds like he's saying this to Truma and Maseh Chal on Shabbos, when he separates them. So you see, you're allowed to give a name on a Friday for Trumas and Maasros to be Chal on Shabbos. And why does Rabbi Yossi not change his mind because of this Mishnah? My Kudu. So what are you going to say? How do you fit in this Mishnah with the words of Rabbi Yossi, who said you shouldn't give a name of Trumas Maseh on Friday for it to be Chal on Shabbos? So the Gemara answers, he's saying now on Friday, the Trumas Maseh will be Chal on that fruit, but part of the Trumas Maseh will come out lemafreya. Once later on I start eating, it will come out on Shabbos, which is the bit when I separate it. So on the one hand, it's working on Shabbos when I separate it. And you're doing this even according to Rabbi Yossi and Rishonim. Basically, you've also, you cannot cause the Trumas Maseh will be Chal on Shabbos, but if the Truma and Maseh is on the Friday, there's no problem that the parts which will become Truma and Maseh will be visible on Shabbos itself. So it's happening before, but we won't know which parts it relates to till Shabbos itself. He says, wait a minute. Hagazmacha. You know, it's all very well, it'll be misbara, which are the pieces we're talking to. But if the fruit is tar, shaisa, truma, tahira, and it's truma, which is tar, which was separated at the end, tahira, then fair enough. The truma will chal now, and it will turn out later on which is the truma when I eat everything else, and what I leave behind will be the truma. And that truma is permitted to a Cohen, it's not muksa, fair enough. But what about when the fruit is tameh? Tries a truma tameh, and it was truma which is tameh. Are you going to say, no, actually it's not a question. Yeah, no, 1 minute. Yeah, the truma will chal now. It will become free and noticeable which is the truma when I eat the fruit, and whatever I leave behind, right, will be truma, and I leave it in the corner of the house. So truma tameh, you can't eat it at all. It's muksa. So in order you shouldn't have to move it, you have to make a condition that when I finish the other fruit, the truma is not going to be discerned until after I put it away. I can't move it. It'll be muksa. So until I put it in the corner, that's when the truma will get its name. Tani will enter the brisa, but tartalin, one can move on Shabbos. Echel truma ta'ira, echel truma tamei, by the tani Harav zira. Adamra, this tells me tevel sheyesh alav tanai. Tevel, when they made a condition on Friday, the trumas ma'aser will be chal on the chelek which they separate on Shabbos. Mutar tartaloi, you're allowed to move it on Shabbos, right? Now we're not talking about fruit of truma. Truma tamei is muksa. We're not talking about tevel. That tevel is also muksa. Right? You can't separate trumas ma'aser from Shabbos. You can't use it. We're talking about fruit where you made a condition on the Friday that the part you will separate on Shabbos will have a name, truma and maser, right? And the Bryce is telling you this fruit is not muksa because you're allowed to separate it on Shabbos through this condition that you make on the Friday. Now the Bryce says you're allowed to move on Shabbos the fruit. We made a condition, even if they're tamei, and the truma that will be separated will be tamei, but the truma tamei, once you separate it, is muksa. You can't move it. The Gemara says, how are we going to separate truma through a tanai where you won't have the need to move it? What do? You look at part of it, you look at it, and with your thought, you'll cover that bit will be trumas maser, and you can eat the rest. Now we've got machlokes Tanakam and Gamliel. If this luf is muksa and you can't move it, we bring a brayso that's got other dinim based on Shimon Gamliel. It's not muksa because it's food for the ravens. You're allowed to move mustard on Shabbos. It's food for the doves. Which is a type of grass. What is it? What do they call it? Some sort of grass they use. The deers eat it. The deer. It's broken glass. Is that maybe the ostrich perhaps? We don't really know what these things are. If you can move them, then you should be able to move the twigs. The elephants eat them. He allows you to move the luf. What do they call a luf there? Luf?
Some kind of...
Some pulse, some bean or something. It's food for the ravens. Now, this is machlokes Tanakam and Shimon Gamliel about moving food fit for animals, various animals. What are we talking about? If you want to move that food and the animal has the food, is eating it, and you find it in the marketplace, there's no argument. Everyone holds you can move the food. It's mucha. It's not muksa. If that person hasn't got it, which read is this? If that person now has not got, he hasn't got the food. He hasn't got. Go back a bit. Go back 2 lines. Right. Has he got an animal of that kind that eats? Not has he got the food. Has he got an animal that eats that food? Then fair enough. And other people also have this animal. Then there's no question. Then he can move the food. However, if he has not got that animal of that type, he's not got an elephant. And you don't find them in the marketplace. There's no argument. Also, you can't move the food. He has the animal, but no one else has got the animal. They said, you don't find those animals anywhere. As if he hasn't got it. And you can't move the food, which is fitting for the animal. He's got the animal. So it's going to be as if the animal is around. And therefore he's allowed to move the food. Halacha base. Is that right? Chavile kash, v'chavile eitzim, v'chavile zrodin. So various bundles of straw, wood, soft reeds. You get them ready for animals to eat. And you can move them. If not, you can't. Cohen is a sal. You can put a basket down as like a step before the chicks. They go up, they go down into their nest, into their area. Tanagoles shabarcha, a chicken that's run away. So you're allowed to push it with your hands until it comes in the house. Umedadin, you're allowed to support the calves and the young donkeys and to allow them to push them to go. Even Bishus Rabbim in the street. And a woman can push her son, support her young child to walk. even in the street. When is this? He can take regular achas, so he can take one leg, put one leg down. If he's like dragging his legs when the mother pushes him, also you can't do it because then the mother is carrying the child. Okay, so we said you can move these bundles of straw, wood, or whatever if they are prepared for use, like animal food. Sounds like you have to do a ma'aser of preparation, but just designation with your thought is not enough. So who is this Tana? This mission is only Ela Krav Chanina. The Amar said, I didn't know you know in Rabbi Lechamas Gura. We used to go with Rabbi to Chamas Gura on Shabbos. He would say, Biru lachem chalukei avadim. Get yourself ready, these stones, designate them to sit on them, and then you can move it tomorrow. So get them ready before Shabbos, prepare them. It would be a hachana through a ma'aser, not just with thought. You could do an action. You needed an action as well. So again, these things to allow them on Shabbos is like the view of Rebbe. According to the others who argue, who hold even machshava is enough. Maybe you can designate it just through your thoughts. You don't have to do a ma'aser. Rabbi Yosef, Shani Hacha. This is different what Rebbe said about the stones for sitting on. Shahu Kekise. The stone is fitting to sit down as it is, even if you do nothing to it. Therefore, those who argue on Rebbe hold that the thought is enough to designate it for sitting down. But these bundles, where you need a ma'aser, they're not fitting for animal food as they are. First, you need to undo the knots and all the rest. And so some say, everyone agrees, they need a proper ma'aser to allow them to be moved on Shabbos. Bundles of straw with kash, like a mefuzahu. Now, even the straw that is tied up is like scattered straw. Surely, it's fitting for animal food as it is, even before you start undoing it. Of course, it's fitting. So, the Gemara now, does it have an answer? Yeah, it doesn't really. Therefore, this is like stones which are fitting to use as they are. And yet, the Mishnah says you need to prepare the straw, like animal food, of Shabbos, to allow it to move it on Shabbos. So our Mishnah is not going to agree with those who argue on Rebbe with the stones. You have to say it's like the view of Rebbe, like Rav Zira explained it. Right. Now we're going to talk about the basket that you turn over for the chicks. Right, you got Machlokes Rav Yemi and Rabbi Bar about muksa of an item which is a bosses for Dova muksa. According to Rabbi Bar, bosses for muksa, when you designate it for Isur, you designate it to be a bosses, even if the bosses is not fitting for that. And you just did a temporary designation, yeah? But if you don't designate it befeirush to be a bosses, it's not got a din of a bosses, even if it's fitting for that purpose. So Rav Yemi is the other way around. He holds a bosses in muksa when it's miyuchad leisa, it's designated, it's fitting to use that purpose. Even if you don't designate it, but it's fitting for that. But if it's not fitting for that, it's not bosses, even if you designated it for a period of time. But if it's not fitting, he holds it's not fitting. So the Gemara is going to ask on a view of Rabbi Yirmiyah from Mishnah later on, and we're going to ask on a brisa about our Mishnah. Masechet Pliga. The Mishnah seems to go against the one who said, Amanda Oma Kala Miyuchad. There's got to be something designated to be a bosses, Le'isur, then also, then you can't move it. Even if you didn't designate it, but it's set aside for that usually. The Tanina, we've learned the Mishnah, a stone which is on the barrel and you're carrying it, and you need to take the wine from the barrel. Mata, you're allowed to pour the barrel out, sit on its side, and the stone falls away, but no feles. So you're not actually carrying the stone. Now the Mishnah allows you to pour the barrel, so the barrel itself is not a bosses to the stone, even though it's fitting to use as a bosses. And it's because maybe you didn't designate the chavis clearly to be used for the stone. So you see, even something fitting to be a bosses le'isur is not muksa if you didn't designate it for that. And that's not like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Bar Shem Rabbi Barashi, Pasala, he will explain the Mishnah. It's talking about b'shecheach. You forgot the stone on the barrel. Now, since you didn't have kavanah to leave the stone there, it's not forgotten. Then it's not bosses. Remember, bosses is always where you intentionally intended to leave something there. Masnisa pliga amanda amana. Now, brisa goes against. You got the words yet? Masnisa pliga. The brisa goes against manda, the one who said kalam miyuchad le'isur. If it's designated miyuchad, it's there to use the bosses le'isur. Also, you can't move it, even though it's not really fitting for it at all. But something which is not fitting to use is mutter, even if you designate it. The Tanina, we've learned our Mishnah, Cohen salif nevra. Can you put the basket in front of the chicks? Sheyalav Sheyalav, the garment come down. V'tani alav, we learnt on that once they're alu me'elen, once they've gone up on their own accord, me'elen, also the tatel, you can't move this thing anymore. It's a basis. Now the basket thing is not really fitting, it's not made for the chicks to climb on, right? And even so, you cannot move it, it's become a basis. So you see, anything which you designated to be a basis for a temporary period of time, you cannot move it even though it's not even fitting for that use. And that's not like the view of Rav Yirmiyah. Tifta, we can explain, but most, we're talking about a case with this basket which is dirty and smelly, and the chicks have made a mess on it, and therefore it's meyuched to serve the chicks, and that's what it's going to use it for. And even according to Rav Yirmiyah, it's a basis, therefore for muksa, you can't move it. There was the era said, V'atani, when we learned Rav Oshia, afilu sar, even Katie holding a whole sar, with a takav of 3 calf, which you put in front of the chicks. Now this sort of thing, you're never going to leave it for the chicks. It's like maybe they're not going to be dirty, you're going to wash them. Well, they're definitely not set aside for the chicks. They're there, you're going to use it for measuring and all sorts of things. You're definitely going to clean it. And even so, the Bride says you cannot move these kalim. So you see, anything which you designate for a muksa purpose for a temporary period of time, even though it's not miyuchad to be muksa, it becomes a basis. The Gemara does not answer the question. To be continued, Rabbi Isai.